Thank you everyone for joining us. Happy Thursday. Welcome to Venture Cafe Cambridge, where we connect innovators to make things happen. A couple of ground rules. Please keep your mics off unless you're speaking or the presenter tells you to, and feel free to ask questions in the chat. Before we get started, I'd like to introduce our presenter, Michael Smith, CEO, let me change the slide, at Rising Tide Cybersecurity Management. So I'm just going to hand it over to you, Michael. Good luck.
Here you go. Throw you into the pool. Good luck. So let me actually share a screen here.
Oh.
All right. So that should be good. Cool. So hi, everybody. We've got a small but dedicated group. Hopefully I do this well. Don't step on my own feet. So this is me. I am an independent consultant. I'm not trying to turn this into an interview. I do like three core things. One is just web survivability for countries, country governments, large infrastructure operators. Another thing that I do is I function as a chief technology officer, advisor, mentor for cybersecurity companies. So helping them to build better products. And then the last thing is what we're talking about today, which is I help startups, small companies, small, medium-sized companies deal with any kind of data security, information security issues that they have as a virtual chief information security officer. Right. So I just help them. And it's a lot of stuff that we're going to go over. A lot of this presentation is philosophy or some of the problems that I see on a day-to-day basis. Okay. Nobody really knows what a security engineer is. I think the hardest part of this job, this career field, this industry is in actually explaining to people what we do, because most of it's boring. Most of it's strategy, setting up direction, securing budget. And then once every 6 months, we have like what happened last week, which is, oh my God, there's a hole in Microsoft Exchange, and you have to go upgrade your stuff. Okay. And the problem with us is that if we do our job right, nobody notices. And when we do our job wrong, everybody notices. Okay. And so we kind of have to deal with that. But it does mean that we do have a communication problem with the rest of the world. And a lot of times people don't want to hear about, brushing their teeth. I've actually been on the vendor side and had PR people explain a story to me and saying, no, that's not a good pitch, because journalists aren't interested in writing stories about brushing your teeth. Okay. Now, the thing that's so interesting to me is that we really have three different types of security that I deal with. Up at the top here, I've got enterprise security. That's the banks, the big e-commerce folks, the government folks. Sometimes they have a staff of 150 people. Then on the right-hand side, you've got product and device security. That's really cool, but it's a lot of nuances in how that particular product was built, right? So say if it's an embedded device or a fitness tracker or something like that, has a completely different set of requirements. One of the projects that I worked on that was absolutely fascinating many years ago was I worked for TSA as a contractor, and I was the security officer for all of their metal detectors, walk-through scanners, x-ray machines, all of that stuff. And I helped them to actually build those machines so that way they could get connected to the network. My one little claim to fame is that when you get your boarding pass, the signature, there's a barcode on it. I actually wrote the signature standard for that, so you could prove that the boarding pass was issued by the airline. Okay. And then the bottom left hand circle there, that's the startup security. And that's actually really fun because a lot of times you don't even have a security person inside of the company. So you get maybe 5 hours a month in order to talk to people, right? You get a lot less resources, but then also you have a lot less of a target, okay? Or you are a lot less of a target. Here's just to sum it up. The big thing to understand is that in enterprise security, they have these things called frameworks. And that framework is just a big list of how somebody's lost data or had some kind of an incident, right? How they've been hacked in some way. And so they just add new stuff to these frameworks over time, and they're really really big, right? Like the National Institute of Science and Technology has one, and it's got 200 different data points that you have to do. So in the enterprise security side, we go in and we say everything's included. Now let's take out the stuff that we don't need. Okay. So they manage by exclusion. On the startup side, you say, wow, we've got 5 people. What's the bare minimum that we need? Let's build that and ignore the rest of it until that becomes a problem. Okay. And you'll see that in a lot of different places. So for instance, Microsoft Windows as an operating system was not designed to be networked. Okay. And then as soon as we started connecting it to a network, offices started to be networked. Then suddenly we had several years of worms and all these viruses where all these machines started getting attacked. That's the interesting thing to me, which is in a startup, can we take care of what our security needs are today and still keep an eye towards what do we need to be planning to do in order to grow as our business grows, as we get customers. Now, where kind of the gateways for when you should change, okay? And that's what I'm showing here on this slide. At what point do you grow in some way where you need extra help? Okay. The biggest one out there is customer terms and conditions. So you go talk to somebody in a regulated industry. So you go talk to a bank, right? And you have something, you're going to sell it to the bank. The bank has data security or information security provisions in that contract. And suddenly now you have to do all of that big list that the bank does. Okay. Getting acquired. So maybe where you go and you're talking to another company that wants to buy your company. And part of that planning involves upgrading your security status in order to fit in with that larger company, right? A lot of times those larger companies are also regulated and they have the same data concerns as a bigger enterprise company. Part of funding rounds. So when you, especially something like a Series A, Series B, when you need to grow and you hit that growth curve, and suddenly now you have more users, you have more computers, you have more assets, you have more data, you have more customers. And as part of that planning, you should have some slice of that funding that you're getting that pays for a security team. And then the last one is compliance regulations. So there's a bunch of alphabet soup there. You've got GDPR, which is the privacy regulation in the EU. If you remember back to 2018, that's when the web became unusable because now every website you go to, they have that pop up that says, we collect all this data. Do you allow us to do that? And you say, that's because of GDPR. PDPA is a similar law inside of Singapore. And we have a relatively new one here in the US that is CCPA, which is inside of California. Similar to GDPR, it's US regulation, and we're seeing more of that. But if you're collecting information about your users, about people, about anything that could identify them, so name, phone number, email address, using any kind of cookie for login or to track your users on the web, um, or any kind of healthcare data, you're covered by all of the privacy regulations. Okay. The next one on the list is HIPAA, which has been around for quite a while. There's an addition to it called the HITECH Act. It is a law, mostly covers healthcare data and how it can be shared between hospitals and healthcare providers. But it also has a section of it that has a set of security requirements for you. So once you start taking any kind of healthcare data, even if it's just, you're making a fitness tracker, or it's a simple mobile application that tracks calendar stuff, once you start doing those kind of things, then you have to play by the security controls in HIPAA. PCI DSS follows credit cards. That's the payment card industry digital security standard. But it follows where credit cards, where you take credit cards. And then anything that's critical infrastructure. So telecommunications, finance, water supply. There's a list of those that every country has. So if you're designated as part of that critical infrastructure, then the government gives you a set of security controls to follow. There are others, but that's the big part of it. So what you really have to look at is, as a business, understand when you've arrived at one of these points, and then start expanding a security program out of that. Okay. I want to go through some of the incidents that we're seeing, especially in the startup space. This is probably the biggest, most dangerous one that's out there today, and that's this thing called ransomware. Okay, and ransomware is it's a virus. We call it malware. It gets on top of a device, usually a desktop or laptop, and it encrypts all of that hard drive that's on the device, and it gives you some kind of pop-up like this. Okay? And the whole idea is you go to the criminal's website, you pay them in Bitcoin or Monero or some kind of cryptocurrency. They give you the key to go decrypt all of your files so you can get your files again. Right? They've been doing this for 3 or 4 years, and it's very, very profitable for the criminals, because you lost all your data, right? And if you think about how much stuff you have on your laptop right now, if that went away, well, that might set you back 6 months in development, right? So, or maybe it's your customer data, or it's some kind of data. And so they really, really push you to pay them in some kind of currency that they can go, so they can go switch it to whatever place they want to, where they can go cash it out. Okay. But ransomware, you hear about it quite a bit. And the companies that get hit by it get absolutely devastated, because it hops from computer to computer to computer throughout the entire company and wipes out all of the data that they have. So how do you fix that? The first one, easiest one, is backups. Okay. Back up your desktop and laptop. I have a couple different strategies that I use. I have a USB drive here. You have to see it in the little picture. But I've got a USB drive. I just hook it up to a docking station. When I drop my laptop down in my house every day, I've got an automated backup that backs up to that device. I also back up across the network to a network file store. And then there are some services that help you back up across the internet, so that even if you get a piece of malware on your device, it could lock up the device, but it won't lock up the backup because it's someplace else. Okay. Backing up phones, same thing. There are applications that do that. There's a company that's out of, I believe they're in Rhode Island, but my former boss and a couple other people work there, and that's Datto, so DATTO, and they have a software that does that backup out across the internet for you. File servers, a lot of the viruses now go through network shares, so they'll spread via network shares. So you got to back up file servers. Anything that's a production environment, there's malware or ransomware now that will attack exposed databases and encrypt the database, which gets pretty scary if it's out in production. Okay, so being able to back up your production environment, source code, especially if you're building applications where a ransomware event means that you lose 1 week or 1 month worth of programming time, and that delays you getting into market. And then a lot of times the ransomware, because of the way it spreads, it will actually corrupt some of the backups that the computer is directly attached to. So be sure to have another offline backup of that. Okay. And then the usual stuff. So antivirus software, get it installed, keep it updated, basic stuff, and then operating system and application updates, because that closes some of the holes that the ransomware uses to spread. Right. And that's ransomware. Again, it's hygiene. It's you should brush your teeth, but it's critical stuff that can actually help you out later. Taxis are the next big attack for startups, and the reason is that people leave stuff in taxis. Right? Laptops. I've seen enough of these laptops, mobile phones. Just getting lost inside of a taxi, you lose whatever is on that device, and whoever has that device has access to whatever that device can access. So, how are people fixing that? First of all, do a backup. Have your have all the data that's on that device someplace else, so that you can grab a piece of spare hardware, restore everything onto it, and keep doing your job. The second thing is, most phones have a Find My Phone function where you can turn that on. It's a short registration process, but when you lose your phone, you can go phone home and find out where your phone is, and whoever has it can answer the phone and tell you where you can find your phone. Okay. There's this thing called mobile device management. Mobile device management, you see it a lot in the enterprise space, but that creates a part of your phone and now laptops that can have all of your company data on it, that you can do a remote detonation. So you can go into the MDM interface and say, yes, I lost this device, wipe all of the data that's on that device, and now whoever has that device doesn't have access to it. Okay? And then the last thing is, have a couple extra spares. So your laptop dies, right? Maybe you didn't even lose it in a taxi. It just dies, power supply goes bad. And you can restore onto that spare hardware, keep doing your job. Okay. Next thing is account takeover. There are a couple names for it. One is account takeover. Another is credential stuffing, just regular account hacks. But basically, the way that the attack works is the attacker gets your username and password to a service, and then they just log in and change the password and lock you out. Okay. Now, the reason that this is important for small businesses is because we do everything on SaaS or via websites, right? I've got an accounting application. It's a web application. It's SaaS, right? And that has all of my finances in it. I use Google's G Suite, right? And G Suite does my file sharing, runs my personal website, runs my business website, and does my email. And so if you take over my account, then you can get into all of the different services that my business actually needs to function, right? And if you even look at my accounting package is also using my business email account that's hosted on G Suite, so you can get into that. I have had a couple interesting incidents with this. One of the ones that I worked was called Hacksgiving, and it was Thanksgiving of 2014, where there was an advertising network. Advertising network has an account that gets taken over. The attacker decides that instead of just putting up ads, they put up ads with pieces of JavaScript that anybody who went to a website where that ad was that day got hacked by the Syrian Electronic Army, right? So they started spreading bad stuff through that account. I've also seen people where their account gets taken over, the attacker turns around and goes to someplace like AWS or Microsoft Azure, Office 365, does an account reset or a password reset, and now they can go build their own infrastructure on AWS and have the victim pay for it because it's under their account. Okay? So I've seen a lot of that stuff happen. The fixes for that, relatively easy. The first thing is to use two-factor authentication, right? And there are a couple different things. So Google and Microsoft have applications. You go through a process to register it. Google is called Authenticator. I forget what the Microsoft application is. It's like the Microsoft login app or something. But you go in and you register it, and then you pull up the application. And when you go, say, to log into Office 365, they send a message to the application, and you go in and say, yes, this is me in the application. Pretty easy to set up, pretty easy to use, but it keeps people out of your Office 365 account and everything that's attached to it, right? Same with G Suite and Google Authenticator. A lot of services support it and support it natively. Okay? There's one-time password. So one-time password is you register your phone. Yeah, Microsoft uses Authenticator. They also have their own application, so they do both. A lot of websites use both. So one-time password is you set up SMS to your phone, and then when you log in, it sends an SMS code to your phone, and it's usually a 6-digit PIN, and you put that in as a second password. Unfortunately, there are attacks now where you can go steal somebody's phone number, and so that's not recommended to use the one-time password via SMS, but it's still better than just using a password. Okay. Use anti-phishing email filtering. A lot of service providers do that. G Suite and Office 365 do some of it. You can add another third-party add-on service in front of that, but just try to get rid of all these phishing links where, say, you get a link in an email that says this, reset your AWS password, and you click it, and it actually goes to the attacker site, and they grab your password. Okay. So a little bit of filtering now helps. DNS filtering can help. So DNS is the domain name system. It translates www.google.com into an IP address. But there are filtering services out there. Cisco Umbrella, Cloudflare has one, Akamai has one. There are a couple others out there. Some ISPs have them. And all it does is it looks for phishing links and it blocks phishing links. Okay? And then the last thing is monitoring services. So there are two of them. What they do is they go out and they grab all of the username and password dumps that criminals are sharing with each other. They put these into a big database, and then you can register. And when you have, when your account has been compromised, they will tell you, they'll send you an email that says, hey, you were part of this data breach, and here's the website, and here's the password that you used. So I named two of them. Have I Been Pwned? A lot of people use. It's a guy out of Australia, and if I find it, I'll flip it in. Okay, so this is what Have I Been Pwned looks like. You just go in, you put in your email address, and oh yeah, you've been pwned. Pwned is hacker slang for owned. And so these are all the databases. So there's a Cydio Day, which was just a big dump of other stuff. It wasn't actually City. This is just a collection. It's a huge collection of accounts. Ledger, which is a cryptocurrency wallet that I use that I wasn't very happy about because now I get lots of fun spam. And then PTix, which is a mobile ticketing application. But you can go in, and then there's a piece here which is subscribe. You can go in and subscribe, and anytime they find something, they'll send it to you. The other organization that I own here, or that I mentioned here, is Hack Notice. And Hack Notice is similar to Have I Been Pwned, but they have a product for businesses so that you can add gamification over the top of it and monitor your company accounts, and your employees can monitor their own personal accounts. But I mentored them last year through Mass Challenge and helped them to build that particular feature. So it's definitely worth going and checking out. And then I think this is the last one. No, this is the second to last one. And that's business email compromise. Business email compromise is a horrible name. Right? It's a name that just absolutely sucks. What it actually is a scam where somebody sends an email to your CFO or your accountant or somebody who's in charge of money, says, hey, I'm the CEO or I'm the VP of products, and we're going to buy this company. Or we have this bill that's due. Please don't tell anybody because it's a secret, but send money to this account, right? So it's either wire the money, send it via PayPal, however the attackers want to receive that money. But please send this money. Don't tell it, don't tell anybody about it. Keep it quiet. And the amount of CFOs that have been tricked by this is absolutely amazing. Okay. And even like I know lots of enterprise companies that have gotten business email compromise emails. Their CFO was smart enough to realize that this was a trick and didn't actually send the money. But I do know of a lot of organizations that have been actually caught. I think that for the attackers or the criminals, this has been $1 billion enterprise for them so far, just by sending emails to CFOs. Now, how do you fix it? First one, really, really easy. Teach your CFO, teach your accounting, teach your finance people to second guess any kind of money transfers. And it's okay to ask because the CEO and anybody inside the business will never tell them to send money and be quiet about it, right? I think there's a place in there for process where if you have a process for paying your vendors, that helps out with some kind of approval. And, as long as you don't deviate from that process, you're still okay. Flag email from external. Office 365 can do this out of the box. You just set it up and say, any email that comes from outside of my domain, go ahead and flag it. And it just puts brackets, sender external, right? That way, that email didn't come from the CEO. It came from somebody outside the organization who's using a domain that's similar to yours. Okay. And then one that I didn't put on here, but that is being able to test your own employees periodically, but send them their services out there that send an email to all of your employees using a domain that looks like yours. So inside of Akamai, we had a domain Akarnai, which looks really, really similar. And so we would send all of our phishing emails and scam emails for our employees. And if people click through, you know what, you caught them. Don't be a jerk about it, but it becomes a training point or an education point. Like, hey, this is a scam that's going around. Keep an eye out for it. Okay. And then the last thing is just web attacks, right? A lot of businesses are doing things online. Obviously, that's how you find customers, especially lately. And that means that your website, especially if you're doing e-commerce, is a lot more critical to your business now than it was 18 months ago, because that's how you get income, right? That's how you engage with your customers. So a couple things that can help there. The first one is outsource your payment processing. So where you have like folks like Stripe or folks like Shopify, where they provide the payment processing and maybe the shopping cart, especially when you're small, if you can outsource that, then that's one less thing that you have to worry about. Okay. And in fact, if you look at what I talked about before with PCI DSS follows where the credit cards go. So if you're not taking credit cards on your servers, on your website, inside of IT assets that you own, then you're not governed by PCI DSS and you don't have to play by the rule book. Okay. But whoever that processor is or whoever the shopping cart provider is, they do have to play by PCI DSS and they know that. And so it's actually better to centralize that. The second thing, use a CDN and web application firewall service. Akamai has one, but they're expensive. Cloudflare has one that's free. but it has a premium version. Fastly has a program for startups where you can get credit, so you can get free service until you grow to a particular point. And they have a security story that's starting to get built. There are a couple other services that are out there. AWS has something that you can add on. Azure has something that you can add on that's a web application firewall. So depending on where you host, there's some things that can be added there. Do vulnerability scans. If you're playing by PCI DSS, you have to get vulnerability scans. It's basically a tool that checks for holes in your web application. Okay. And in fact, in PCI DSS, you have to get scanned. I believe it's every 3 months. You have to get scanned for the record to prove that you have no vulnerabilities. Start moving into DevSecOps, especially if you build your own web applications. You have to have some kind of security process built around building applications, and then update your stuff if you run the platform yourself. Okay. So now, right sizing your organization, like out of everything I've talked about, basically this is what your experience looks like as a startup. So you start out really, really small. You've got less than 10 employees. You're looking at email, turning on updates, running AV, backing up. And, if you're writing code, you're testing it and you're checking it into some kind of revision control system. So that way all of your code gets sent into this center here that has all of the code that you build. Okay. Really, really easy stuff. You don't even really need a security person or a part of a security person at that point. Then once you grow to, maybe 11 to 50, also these numbers aren't written in stone, right? If you have more regulated data, but you're only 5 people, you probably need to act like a bigger company with regards to security. Okay. 11 to 50 employees, you're probably getting some kind of security assessment. Even if you do it yourself, there are checklists out there. You can just go through the checklist and do a self-assessment. Or you can get somebody who comes in for 5 hours a month who helps you walk through a checklist and sets kind of a roadmap for where you're going. Hire a product security engineer if you have a product that has some kind of data, if you're building some kind of firmware or embedded device, if you have a web application that's the majority of your business, get somebody who's good at doing security for that as an engineer. Have some kind of centralized patch management, antivirus updating. That stuff's pretty easy to set up. And then if you're building software, get security tools for your developers. That's a good time to have a conversation with me to figure out what those look like. Okay. And then once you run into 50 plus employees, you probably want a full-time security manager or at least a partial security manager who can help with stuff. You can hire a security operations center. So those folks are called a managed security service provider. They run all of the stuff that you have for security technology. So they watch the screens, look for bad things to happen, and then when bad things happen, they come and help rescue you. Having a full product security program to build a better secure product, some kind of vulnerability reporting system, probably to your audit committee, maybe to your board of advisors, board of directors. A bug bounty program at this point is worth looking at. A bug bounty program is where you tell the world, hey, I've got a product that's out there. If you find vulnerabilities in it, you find holes in whatever it was that I have, and you tell me about it instead of selling it to the bad people. If you give it to me, I'll give you a reward, right? Maybe $500, maybe $1,000. Maybe you get a T-shirt and a smile, right? Maybe we do something about that. But being able to reward researchers with some kind of reward for doing the right thing, which is telling you when you have a problem. Okay? And then the last one is trust communities, where information security people talk to each other, because a lot of what we do is so driven by the crisis of the day, right? So last week, Microsoft Exchange vulnerabilities. So everybody needs to know right now, what are the problems? What do we actually need to fix? What are the actions we need to take? So being involved in trust communities where incident responders, vulnerability management people talk to each other can help you out a lot, because it shortcuts the amount of time to understand when you need to take action. Right? A little bit on customers. You've seen this slide before, but basically how I want to talk a little bit about how to deal with customers when they come in with security requirements, right? And normally what you're doing is you're talking to your customer's CISO, right? Their chief information security officer, and they have a list of things that they need to get done. That's their policy and their big list of things to do. And what they constantly are looking at when they hire new vendors is, what decisions is the business unit making, right? What risks are they taking on? What are the bad things that can happen by hiring this vendor? What things are my business unit doing to manage that risk, right? And just minimize the exposure. And what things do I have to do as a CISO in order to support my business unit? That's really what they're looking at. Honestly, it comes down a lot of times to, here's a list of things inside of the contract. And here are the things inside the contract that you have to do, right? And they're general because it's based on this big, huge list of things. So what do you actually do? What do you negotiate with? Because I've been through, I spent 2 years doing contract red lines on things, right? So the first one is avoid compliance with the customer security policy. They always add that into their security terms and conditions. The problem with that is that they don't really expect you to comply with their security policy. They put that in there because if you have a breach, if you have a data breach, it's probably because you were doing something you weren't supposed to do. And it gives them a reason to fire you as a vendor. Okay. The big problem with it, with the being bound by the customer security policy, is that it only scales out to one customer, right? The more customers you have that all require you to be compliant with their policy, the more conflicts you have where one customer tells you to do this, the other customer tells you to do something opposite, and it just doesn't scale, right? It's DNS, does not scale. Endless vendor questionnaires, they usually have some kind of a questionnaire that they want you to fill out. I've done a lot of them. They all suck, technical term. They all suck because they all ask the same thing differently. So what I always did was I filled out one questionnaire, and it's down here at the bottom. It's called the BITS SIG. BITS is a technical group of, oh God, I don't know. They support financial services, but it's basically the questionnaire to ask all questions. Fill that out once and see if your customers will take it instead of you filling out their specific questionnaire. When it works, it saves you 2 or 3 days worth of cut and paste work. If it doesn't work, well, you tried. Okay. The next thing to avoid is certification to a standard. And the reason why is that normally certification is like an audit. So you pay somebody, that's a direct cost. They come in, they assess you against a particular framework or a particular set of regulations. And then they say, yes, you follow this, and they give you a certification. The reason to avoid that is because, number one, there are costs involved. Some of those might be unavoidable. The second thing is that certification has a lot of liability. And so if you get the same assessment and it's an assessment without the certification piece, it'll probably be 2/3 the price, maybe half the price. So you can save some cash there just by being assessed and not certified. Okay. And then the last thing to avoid there is right to audit. every customer adds right to audit. Unfortunately, just like following customer security policy, it's DNS, it does not scale. Honestly, the more customers you have, you reach this point where if every customer exercised their right to audit, all of your company would spend all day, every day, doing audit support and not actually doing what their real job is, right? It's highly disruptive to your operations, your development, and it is a way for your customers to spend all of your money because you have to pay to support it. Okay. So look for things instead of an audit. Could I get an assessment against a particular standard? That works really well. Could I complete a self-assessment questionnaire and do that once a year and send that to you? Look at what's the service that you provide. And if it's not material to the customer, could you, maybe we do a 2-hour phone call once a year to explain our security program. And we do that instead of a full audit, right? There are other things that you can do. So now, things you can promise. First one, promise that you will have a security program. Okay. That's taking one of these frameworks, redlining the stuff that doesn't apply to you because you're a small startup, and then explaining how you do the other things. Maybe you'll have some things that you have to build, but being compliant with the standard is relatively cheap. You might have to do some sweat equity, but there's no direct cost attached to it. Self-assessments, you can do them all day. You can probably knock one out in a couple days, maybe a couple hours if it's something small. They're relatively easy to do. And again, it's not a direct cost. And then the last one is assessment by a third party. Probably the minimum price for that is going to be around $30,000. You can maybe get one for less. So the standard that's there is SSAE 16, which is you make a list of assertions. I do this, I do this, I do this. You have an assessor come in that says, yes, you do that. And then you get an assessment artifact that explains how you do that. But you can agree to do that, say in the next 12 months, in the next 2 years, something like that, where you can kind of offset it. And then that gives you time to amortize the cost of that out across that time period. Okay. How to engage me. So Evelyn put my link into my LinkedIn into chat. And then I have a corporate site. You can go check that out. Okay. That's all I have for slides. What kind of questions do we have?
Thank you very much, Michael. Wow, that was a lot of great information packaged in such a short period of time. Thank you so much.
Yeah, it's dense. It's dense. If you don't come away with your head tipped to one side, then I didn't do it right.
So question number one, is it possible to get a hold of the slides? I know that there are some people in the audience who would like to get them. What should they do?
Slides, yeah, no problem. I can just, I'll burn them as a PDF. Just hit me up with LinkedIn. And I'll drop them on you. I do have a recorded variant of this, so it doesn't have all of the attack stuff. Right, so it doesn't have all of the attack stuff, but I recorded it. It's up on my very nascent YouTube channel.
That's okay. If you can,
but it's there.
If you can save it as a PDF, and if you could drop the link to your LinkedIn here in chat so folks can reach out to you. But also, we are recording this session, and the raw recording is going to be sent to you all tomorrow in our recap email. So it will be just, you can only access it from your mailbox as you open. It will be a Zoom recording, so you'll also be able to see it. We have a couple of questions here in chat. Let me see. So we have one from Will. Can you talk a little bit about the relationship between cyber and physical security? What are some sort of common physical security vulnerabilities, and how can bad actors take advantage of those? For example, to steal data or cause damage on the cyber side.
Yeah. So physical security is, if you look at one of the frameworks, you've got this huge framework. NIST is a good example. It has 13, I think, different subject areas. One of those subject areas is physical security, right? And back in the old days, so back when I was born, because I'm old, computer security or data security was physical security, because computers filled up a room, right? So you weren't just, it's not like you had a laptop where you could go lose it in a taxi. You'd have to break into the data center, steal this thing, put it on a dolly, put it into a moving van, and move it to the next place. That's how you stole data. It wasn't really scalable. So we have a lot of physical security requirements. A lot of them revolve around access to the data center. So wherever data is really stored. And then there's physical access controls for the building, where some security people, their brain just melts because they don't understand how to take those same physical security controls and move them into a coffee shop, right? So I've got employees sitting at Starbucks. You know what? That's right. You do have a lot more exposure there than you do inside of your office. And so people have really been grappling with the idea of, how do we actually provide security for somebody in a coffee shop? And one of the simple things is just they've got the privacy screen, so people can't look, unless they're right immediately behind the laptop. There are some things you can do to protect that laptop from the Wi-Fi. There's a concept of getting data off of the laptop, so there's not really much there. It's all centrally located. So yeah, there is a lot of crossover. I think the easiest way is to understand it is just to sit down and look at the specific pieces of the frameworks and what they say as requirements, and then use some common sense beyond that. Okay. I've got tons of stories. Like, we had one of the incidents that I worked was people walked right into the data center, stole the hard drives right out of the computer, waved at the camera, and walked out. It was like, oh my God, how did they do that? So I spent a good 6 months running from site to site to site for a government customer, just to look at what are the physical security controls in their facilities.
Thank you. I know there is another one from Susan here in chat. The Microsoft Enterprise breach recently. Any key tips regarding that? Fixes, what to look for?
Yeah, that one's a hard one. That one's a hard one. If it's a vulnerability inside of Exchange, it really didn't hit the small businesses, because it was small businesses use SaaS. We all use SaaS email applications, right? Even if you're on Office 365, it's still, you consume it as SaaS. And it really hit the folks that are medium and bigger, or the people who bought into, there was the small home office. What do they call it? Home office server? Small business server is what they call it, which is an old version of a standalone Exchange server and file sharing, some other stuff for small businesses. There's still some of those out there. So when vulnerabilities happen, there's kind of a life cycle to it. So the first one is everybody goes, oh shit, right? Like, we've got a problem. There's a flurry of people trying to diagnose, do I have this in my environment? If so, where is it at? Then you go back to a round of, what do we know about the particular vulnerability? How is it executed? Where is it executed from? Okay, so Exchange is bad because people have Exchange servers that are running where Exchange is exposed to the internet, because that's how they get their email. right? Same with web servers, same with a lot of other services. VPNs are a good example, where those are actually exposed to the internet. So then what do? Do you shut it off, right? Shut it off, wait for a patch to be released, or shut off the internet access, wait for a patch to be released. And if so, apply that as soon as possible, where normally you might wait for like Saturday evening to reboot all of your servers. So that's like your patch day. Maybe you want to apply the patch and reboot it in the middle of the business day, regardless of whether it's a patch cycle or not. Okay. So there's constantly this, it's always a crisis, and it's always a dumpster fire how people respond, because you don't know the full amount of information. You're doing triage, and you're really dependent upon the vendor releasing that update for you to apply. Okay. Unfortunately for Microsoft, they did the Exchange problem, and then a couple days later, they killed the login service for Azure for a couple of hours, and so it's not a good month for Microsoft. Okay, but the keys to success there is understanding the information, having the right connections to be, or information sources to be able to get timely information on what should you do, and then to be able to, or have good enough management over your resources, so you're, in this case, servers, so that you can apply that patch and control it and get it on there as fast as possible.
Thank you. I believe that was all that we got in chat today. Thank you so much for such a great presentation. I hope those who joined us today will connect with you on LinkedIn, and you'll get the recording in your mailboxes tomorrow. Thank you so much for being
Cool.
here. Hope
Thanks,
to see you all
everybody.
next week for She Connects.